Hey wrestling fans, Roy Lucier here with another exciting episode of Japanese Wrestling Classics with Roy Lucier. My guest this week really needs no introduction, for he is a member of one of the most famous families in wrestling history, the Malenko family. He was trained by the man that we know as the godfather of pro wrestling in Japan, Karl Gotch. He comes to us and tells us about his amazing stories of his days in All Japan, Mexico, Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi, the original UWF, and so much more here. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is none other than Joe Malenko. And without further ado, I'd love to get straight to this interview, everybody. Here we go with my interview with Joe Malenko. Hey, wrestling fans, this is Roy Lucier here with Japanese Wrestling Classics with Roy Lucier, and I have a special treat for you today. I have on here right now one of the most legendary figures ever. He is the son of Boris Malenko. He made a great career over in Japan over the years, working for many different companies, but especially in All Japan. I have on the line right now Mr. Joe Malenko. Mr. Malenko, how are you doing today?
Hey, Roy, doing okay. It's Joe or Jody.
Joe or Jody. Okay, got it. So, Joe, tell us about growing up Malenko. What was it like to be in the household of the legendary Boris Malenko and to be around him as a father and in the business?
Hey, look, it was, like everything else growing up as a kid, it's a mixed bag. Being in the wrestling business is a tough business. It's hard on a family. And so when your dad's a professional wrestler, at least for the first few years, you're traveling a lot, but he's always on the road, even when you're traveling with him. And then later on, when you settle in because he wants to get you settled down in some area of the country, and he did here in Tampa, then he goes on the road, so you don't see him much. What sucks as a kid, I always knew my dad was out there trying to make a buck for us and trying to do what he can to provide well for us. But in the same breath, it would have been nice to have him around a little bit more. That was just that was the nature of the business. Hard on marriages, hard on families. That's why so many guys in the business have been married more times than years they've been in the business in some cases.
Yeah. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your own career and about the godfather of pro wrestling in Japan, Karl Gotch? How was it like to train underneath him, and how was he away from the ring?
So you just asked a whole bunch of stuff in one shot. My career. So I sort of had an abbreviated career by choice. Unlike a lot of guys in the business, I'm one of those guys who had the opportunity to use the business to, get around a little bit, make a few bucks, make a little bit of a name for myself in different places. Obviously, I played off of the Malenko name with my dad, set in stone here in Florida and in other parts of the country. Then that's what I did. I mean, I went to pharmacy school. I got a good degree behind me, and I worked other jobs trying to make a living and did a whole bunch of different things. But always had professional wrestling in the background that I did, and especially in Japan, where I love to go over there. I love to go over there for a number of reasons. Japan was my mainstay, mainly because you knew the caliber of the people that you were going to be working against, and it was always top notch. You got to work against the best of the best here in the States because everybody was going over to Japan. The reason everybody went over there is because they treated you great. You knew that when you went to a show and you were going to get paid X amount of dollars for a week, that you were going to see those dollars. I always had to laugh because after every single tour, they would come to you and they'd pay you, and the guys would hand you the money and they'd look at you, kind of expecting you to count it, and I never, ever once counted my money.
Wow.
Because I knew I didn't have to. And I didn't even count it. I didn't even wait until they left the room to count it. I just didn't bother with it until I got back into the States.
Nice.
You just didn't have to worry about it, as opposed to here in the United States where, there was an old saying back in the day, there's only two kind of promoters, bad and worse. And so if you were going to get stiffed by anybody in the world, you were going to get stiffed by wrestling promoters. That's a gross generalization. Obviously, there's a lot of guys who have done real well in this business and not been stiff. But the rule of thumb in the day was if there was a way to tell you the house was less than it was, they were going to do it. Even my own father stiffed me on numerous occasions. but I loved him, so he got away with it.
Now, early on in your career, you actually took Carl's name and wrestled in Mexico for UWA under the name Carl Gotch Jr. What do you remember about those matches?
They were not that great. I was a bit of a fish out of water. So I had wrestled a little bit here in the States, and obviously I grew up in the business. But it was, the luchador, lucha libre style was different for me. It was. It was what it was, and it wasn't my style. And so when I went down there, I did the best I could. And, I had a little bit of issue fitting in, coming to terms with the style. But again, did the best I could. I had a good time down there. The guys, everybody who was working for Flores at the time, they really took care of me. The dad of Brazo de Oro, his name was Charito. I don't remember what he went by in the ring, but he was sort of like my right-hand guy, and he saw me around Mexico City. I lived there for about 4 months, and they treated me awesome. They treated me awesome because they were just good people. And then I was there with Carl's name. It wasn't only until years later that I had a magazine. So I was playing saxophone a little bit. I wasn't good at all, but I brought my sax down there just to kind of play. And so I had a magazine where somebody was playing saxophone, and then Carl was behind me. And it was all in Spanish, and my Spanish is almost non-existent. So it wasn't that long ago, maybe a couple of years back, I had a buddy of mine who's from Venezuela. I said, hey, take a look at this. I never did find out what they said. And he kind of looks at it, and you could see on his face that he didn't want to tell me. I'm like, what? He goes, well, they sort of said you didn't live up to their expectations. I said, no, they were right. It was a difficult time. Before I went there, I was up in the Carolinas. I was refereeing, and I wrestled a few times, not much. And there was a guy by the name of, he was from New Zealand, Abe Jacobs.
Uh-huh.
And Abe worked with me in the ring a little bit. And, my dad obviously had worked with me, and I'd worked with a lot of different guys. Abe kind of helped me hone my skills a little bit. But then again, you go to Mexico, and it's so different. The way you take different things, guys coming off the ropes is just, it's a world of different stuff.
Plus the locking up is left to right. It's like a completely 180. Yeah.
Yeah, it throws you all up.
Yeah. Now, how did you get involved in working the early UWF back in '84, and how did you come into the name you used there, Joe Solkoff?
That was a Carl. That was a Gotch thing. Carl was a guy who. So it was an honor when Carl got me booked in Japan with Flores. He looked at me and he said, "Hey, if you want, why don't you go there as my son?" And I went, "Holy crap, that's pretty good." I'd already trained with him for a few years at the time, so I felt pretty confident on the mat, not necessarily in a ring, wrestling lucha libre style. Mm-hmm. But for him to say that was an honor. And then when he started working on Japan on the UWF with with Sama, Fujiwara and all those guys, he asked me if I wanted to go, and he made that happen. And then he's the one who gave me the name.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Who are some of your favorite opponents to work with back in that original UWF?
Oh man, there were so many. I loved working with Sayama. I loved working with Fujiwara. There was God, I'm trying to remember the kid's name. Lanky kid. It wasn't Kawasaki because that would have made him a motorcycle.
Kazuo Yamazaki.
Maybe it was Yamazaki. Maybe that's who it was.
Yeah.
Excellent. There was just, again, it goes back to what I said about Japan. Whenever you went to Japan, you just worked against guys who were stellar, worked hard, did everything they needed to do each and every night to make it easy on you pretty much. although I took some good kicks.
Now, you and Dean first came to work for All Japan in 1988. How did the both of you come into contact with the company?
Through Lord Blair's. Again, it was part my dad, and Carl was involved as well, and we went through Lord Blair's in Hawaii at the time. He got us booked, and then we continued to do that for a while until pretty much we were on the roster. Not whenever we wanted to, but we had the ability to say that we wanted to be there quite a bit, and Bob and crew just kind of made it happen.
Nice. Were you aware of most of the guys who were there before your first tour?
Most of the guys that were there before my first tour.
Like the Misawas and Kawatas and
No.
the Fushis?
Nope, not at all. I had no clue who any of them were. And then, obviously, as I keep saying over and over again, I was pleasantly surprised. There wasn't anybody that I climbed in the ring with where I went, oh, he stunk. If anything, they might have walked away going, I stunk, but I didn't walk away going, they stunk. Some of these guys were just awesome.
When the both of you were brought in, were you told ahead of time you would be mostly a tag wrestler, or there would be a mix of tag and singles?
We were brought in pretty much knowing that we were going to be a tag team.
Now, what did you think about Giant Baba as a person, both inside and out of the ring?
I didn't know him. My experience with him was limited at best. I would see him around, and he was always cordial with me, but it wasn't like we were best friends or anything. He treated me well. He treated me with respect. Obviously I gave respect back in turn because he was pretty highly respected. I always tell the story that two things that were my claim to fame in Japan. One was that he actually pulled a rib on me, and I've told this number of times, about a hat that I asked for, and he charged me a couple $100 for the hat, and then as I walked away, he was laughing, and he really wasn't going to charge me, but he was ribbing me. And then the second thing was I left my briefcase. I left one of my suitcases in the hotel, and the Japanese team had to pick it up, and Baba actually carried my suitcase. He had to carry it personally. So I'm one of the few guys who can say Baba carried his case for him, and he ribbed me. But
wow.
That's about it. But he was always good to deal with. I mean, when we went back, as we progressed there, and I would go and talking about renegotiating what we were making and how we were being used and stuff. He was always easy to deal with. But of course, I was always pretty easy to deal with. I left my ego at the door before I even opened the door.
And what do you remember most about the matches you and Dean had with the British Bulldogs?
Awesome. I'm going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. I just they were another tag team that just had they had a great presence in the ring. The thing about our match was we were so different. For us to be able to kind of blend our styles together and for it to work, that was it was an interesting night.
Now, what do you remember? You've won the All Japan Junior title twice in your career. What do you remember most about that night where you won the junior title the first time against Masafushi?
Okay, so this is one of my stickler things. Nobody wins anything. You don't win a title. Somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, I use that word a lot. Hey, somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, you want to take this match and have the belt for a little while? And you go, yeah. Or you go, no, I'm going to leave the territory. It's not like you go in there and win anything. It always strikes me as funny. Again, this is my soapbox stuff. It always strikes me as funny when people start to really believe that they won, that they truly were a champion. I mean, look, if you're given a belt, it means obviously that you had something that somebody likes and they want to see you have something as a reward for it, but they also are looking to bring crowds in. So they're looking to play off of whatever you bring to the table, and that's why they give you a belt. But again, they give you a belt. You don't win anything. Most of the guys, if they had to really win their belts, they probably would have never had belts.
Understand very much. Yeah, you had many incredible matches in your career with Fushi. What do you remember about those matches, and what's the key to success to working with someone like him?
I think the key to success in the ring, period, is that you learn to do a couple things. One is you learn to give your body to somebody and trust them. And then you learn that when you're entrusted with somebody's body, that you take care of it, and you're cautious about it. And then it's also how you play out a match based on good ring psychology, and doing that in a way in which you don't interfere with the style of whoever you're in there with. But if you're competent in the ring and you're comfortable on the mat in the ring, you're going to be okay with anybody. Again, these are stories that I tell all the time, the same things that I tell all the time, because that's what happens by the time you're in your 50s and 60s. You keep repeating yourself. It's that old adage about being able to work with a broomstick.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into the ring and you're a competent guy and you're comfortable with how you work a match, and you're in there and you're protecting the guy you're with and you're giving him what he needs to get, you're just going to have a good match. It just usually works. On rare occasion, it doesn't. I mean, I remember being in Australia and I got in the ring, Chris Benoit and myself, and we both got out afterwards and we looked at each other and went, that wasn't that great. and you would have expected Benoit and I to have had a decent match, but we both just didn't gel real well that night, and that happened. But we didn't hurt each other, so that's a good thing. That's probably the most important thing that I see nowadays. It just drives me nuts is people doing these things that they either put themselves at great risk, and the chance that they cut their career very short is too much, or they're putting another guy at risk. They're just not protecting the guy that they're in there with. And again, no reason for that. This is supposed to be a career. It's not supposed to be a one night, throw everything you got at a guy and then call it quits because you end up being, paralyzed from the neck down.
Now, one of the most memorable things during your career in All Japan was your title defense against your own brother, Dean Malenko. What do you remember most about that night where you defended the title against Dean?
I remember thinking to myself that Baba, was a pretty smart guy. It created some buzz. You got to keep in mind our place in Japan. So we were mid-tier players, and I always knew that. So for him to figure out ways to use us and again, draw crowds and make money and put us with the right people at the right time. There's a talent to that, and I think he showed that in that moment where he said, maybe we'll put brother versus brother. Their styles are very similar. They should have a decent match, and you don't see the brother versus brother thing very often, although it's been done multiple times, but you don't see it all the time.
Now, All Japan in the early 90s was known for bringing in a lot of random foreigners like Ken Shamrock, David Sammartino, Eric Embry, Richard Charlin. Are there any foreigners that you wish the company had brought in that they didn't?
No. No, not really. I got a chance to be overseas with pretty much everybody who was anybody at some point. Guys from WWE and guys from Rick was on our tour. We did joint deals at the Tokyo Dome with WWE. There weren't too many guys that were over here that were worth anything that didn't make their way to Japan at some point, and I either had a chance to be on a bus with them or wrestle against them, or at least be in the same auditorium with them and get to know them. Although again, growing up in the business, pretty much everybody at some point.
Yeah.
So there's nobody that I ever said, boy, I wish I had a chance to work against that I didn't get a chance to work against. Now there are some guys that I had a chance to work against that I would have liked to have had more ring time with. And, Dynamite's one of those guys. I always had this special place in my heart for Tom because as much as you'll hear about him from different people, and some of it's not the greatest stuff that puts him on any kind of pedestal. If anything, it buries him under the pedestal. He always treated me very well, and we sort of, I guess we sort of had a mutual admiration. So it worked. It worked well. I just like being in the ring with a guy who's got the intensity that he has. You know, Benoit was another guy like that. I mean, he was I don't want to say he was a Dynamite clone because that makes light of who he was, but you know, he was cut from the same fabric.
Would you happen to know why you and Dean never worked the tag league tournaments in November, December?
I think part of it is we were just small guys. You know, face the fact that this was a big man's game much more in years gone by than it is now, although it still is, to some degree, not as much though. So when we were over there, that's part of the reason we were mid-card guys, because we were smaller guys. In fact, we get I get one of these stories I tell all the time. You know, we get on the bus and Stan, who became one of my best friends over there, Stan would be at the front of the bus. I would sit like 5 or 6 rows behind him. My brother would be pretty much right behind Stan. And as we got on the bus, Stan would go da 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 da, like like we were little circus midgets or something.
Wow.
and Doug Furness, who I became very good friends with, Doug called me Sky Lolo one time.
Wow.
And I didn't take it, bad. I thought, okay, so if you're going to call me Sky Lolo, that's fine. Well, eventually Sky Lolo just became Sky. And so for most of the rest of his life, whenever Doug would talk to me, he would call me Sky. I mean, he would call, so I'd be working pharmacy, and Doug would call, and he'd get the front counter, and they'd say, hey, I got some guy at the front, he's asking for a Sky Lolo. I'm like, it's Doug. Pass him the
Now, did you have a preference working singles or tags?
No, not really. I just like to work. I like to be in the ring. I realize my limitations now at my age, but back then, I thought I was bulletproof like a lot of younger guys, and I just like to be in the ring because regardless of whether or not you're in there as a singles guy or you're in there doubles or you're in there in some kind of crazy, 10-man DQ sort of deal, when it's right and the crowd is hot and everything's going the way it's supposed to go, man, there's nothing better in the world. I mean, there's a lot of things better than that. Having your kids is better. Obviously a lot of things better than professional wrestling, but for that moment, it's pretty amazing. When you're in a place and you got 70,000 people and they start chanting, and you can barely hear yourself think. It's a heady deal.
Wow, yeah. Speaking of large crowds, what was the atmosphere like working that Tokyo Dome show where Baba and Vince worked together and had all those interpromotional matches going?
The Dome was always a great place to work, but I didn't. I mean, there were more intimate venues that I liked. I mean, Corkin Hall is famous, and it's small, but it's famous. I mean, that's where I've had some of the best stuff I've ever been involved in with the Bulldogs, with Terry and Doc, and I mean, just awesome matches in a small little place. But the atmosphere, you just can't beat it. You can't look at the Dome and get that same kind of atmosphere that you get in some of these smaller venues. The Budokan was another place. I mean, I've wrestled some matches there. We've rocked that place. You just don't do the same thing at the Dome. It's too big. You're too disconnected from the crowd.
I had Kurt Beyer on about a month or so ago, and he was telling me about his dad's final match at Budokan. And he was saying, similar to the same thing. It's like it could have sold out the Tokyo Dome, but it wouldn't have been as personal because of how personal a building Budokan was. So I totally understand what you mean.
And when you were there, and the seats in that place, it's almost like they go straight up. I mean, I don't know how high that place is, but you would look up and you go, "Holy crap!" And even though the Dome is obviously a much bigger venue, 3-4 times bigger, there's something about the Budokan that when you're there in that ring and you look up at the seats just seem to go up into the sky. It's amazing. And then I always remember the album Keith Trick live at the Budokan, so I always thought it was kind of special that I was there.
Now, you teamed a lot with Kenta Kobashi as well during this era, even challenging for the All Asia Tag titles. What comes to mind when you think of Kobashi as a wrestler and as a person?
You know, in the early days when he was a young boy, and when I say young boy, I say that somewhat tongue in cheek. You know, that everybody's a young boy in Japan when you're starting out, even if you're not a young boy. Obviously he was a typical young boy. So, you know, he's gonna watch Balba's back, and he's gonna run for stuff, and he's gonna do what he needs to do, and he's gonna be attentive and, you know, very respectful. And so he was always that as he was making his way to the stardom that he eventually got. I kind of lost track of him once he got past a certain level. There was a point though where I saw a change in him, and I don't mean this in a mean way. It's just, you know, he sort of came into his own. There was a time where he was in the ring with a couple of the young guys at one of the matches, and it was before the crowd got in, and he was really abusing the crap out of the kids, and that was typical of the that was typical of a lot of the guys in the business, or, you know, not just the Japanese, where they would get younger guys in the business, they would beat the shit out. And I didn't agree with that. That wasn't my style. I mean, I could hold my own in the ring, but I didn't have to beat the crap out of you. If I could handle you, I'd handle you, and you would know it, and that was good enough. So I mentioned something to him, and he looked at me and he goes, "You're in Japan." And I went, "Okay, I got you." And that was kind of when I realized that he had changed. And again, don't take it wrong. It's not that, you know, I'm not saying that he became an asshole. I'm not saying that he, you know, started to believe his own hype or anything. It was literally, you could see that he was coming into his own, and at that point he wasn't the student any longer. He was Kenta Kobashi, and he was going to let me know that this is the way we do things. If you don't like it, you know, there's other territories, I guess. Have fun.
Now, how come in March of '92 that was your final tour of All Japan? Was that around the time where you were starting to think about being a pharmacist?
No, I was a pharmacist from '83 on. I graduated pharmacy school in '83 and became a pharmacist in '83. So.
Okay, got it.
I was always in pharmacy, and I was doing I've been pretty lucky and blessed, because there's only one word that makes sense, and it is blessed. I've been blessed to do a lot of different things. So I've always done a lot of different things besides wrestling. And as I said earlier on, wrestling for me was a means to an end. It wasn't my livelihood. I wasn't like my brother. My brother knew that he wanted to be a professional wrestler. That's all he lived for, breathed for. That's all he worked for. He wasn't even going to really get a good job until he got into the business. He was going to wait for the business. Thank God he got a break, and he got a break because he was good, obviously.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like that. I knew that I could go on tours, and I could, you know, wrestle a match here and there, and I could have decent matches, and I could make a few bucks. I could, you know, still kibitz with the guys and have the camaraderie of the boys, and not do it full time, and not be sucked into a lifestyle that was kind of tough. Even though I had my own issues with my lifestyle, I didn't let wrestling take over me. So many other things. Yeah.
Now, you stopped working All Japan at that time. You started working for Fujiwara's strong style group over there, including a match against a very young Minoru Suzuki. Any memories about working at that time?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of memories. Shamrock was part of the dojo at the time. In fact, Shamrock had come and worked at Baba's group with us. We were in Okinawa. He was my tag team partner. Actually, he was my tag team partner on that tour. And some of the worst matches I ever had were me and Shamrock. Joel Deaton to this day. Well, before Doug died, Doug would always remind me of the worst tag match he ever saw. And it was the match between myself, Ken Shamrock, versus Joel Deaton and Dick Slater. And so if you think about the four guys that are in that ring, and you think, why would that be a bad match? You can come to your own conclusions.
Now, what would you say is the biggest difference between working for companies like UWF and Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi and then working for companies like All Japan and New Japan?
Oh, look, again, you're stating the obvious by asking a question. The larger companies had the wherewithal to do, to be able to take better care of you. You were put up in nicer places. You were transported in nicer ways. You were just, you were seen to and dealt with, and on a much better scale. The houses were bigger. Everything. The bigger promotions were just big promotions, and they were easy to deal with, and they paid you better.
Now, a lot of people say that you and Fujiwara were the two best students that Carl Gotch ever trained. What do you think about that statement, and do you still talk to Fujiwara nowadays?
I saw him. I brought Carl's ashes, some of his ashes I brought to Japan for them to be interred in the cemetery there about 3 or 4 months ago now, I guess. It was the 10th anniversary of Carl's death, and I took Fujiwara there. It was pretty emotional between him and I. We have a long history, great respect for one another. I thought we were going to end up, crying in each other's arms because it's a lot of history. As far as who's best and who was Carl's best students and who was this and who was that, I don't play those games. I mean, I felt confident on a mat doing submission style wrestling. Fujiwara obviously felt very confident on a mat doing submission style wrestling. That was our thing. I spent, sheer time with Carl. I spent more time with Carl Gotch than anybody ever did. I was with him pretty much every day for 7 years. Even when I was at the end of my high school career and I started dating a little bit, Carl would look at me and go, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm a young guy. I'm supposed to date." He goes, "No, you're really not. You're supposed to wrestle." I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'll give up girls for you, as long as that don't send me on a different path."
Now, you helped out, obviously, a lot at the Malenko gym, training some amazing talent like Mark Marrow, Sean Waltman, and many others. What's your advice to anyone who's thinking about becoming a pro wrestler nowadays?
I think my advice has been the same and would continue to be the same no matter how the business changes. One is, part of my advice is if you're looking to get a door opened up for you, you probably stand a snowball's chance in hell. But if you know that and you go in with that expectation and that's clearly defined for you, then you're okay. So, it's what I used to tell people who came into the school. I would almost have a conversation. I would do the disclaimer conversation with people to the point where I would almost tell them that they were nuts doing this. Because what I wanted to make sure that everybody understood was that somewhere down the road, months later, when they had, put everything they had into it, and they were looking around and nobody was calling, that they couldn't look at me and say, "Yeah, but you promised that I'd get into the business, or you promised that I'd be this, or a superstar." And I could turn back to them and go, "No, I told you not to do it." But we were pretty lucky to be able to bring some guys along that became talented hands, and they did okay. And the amazing thing to me is the breadth and depth of people and the influence of those people that we have had a hand in. There was a guy who was started to do a book. Scott Teal is doing one now. But there was a guy who started doing a book, and he did a sort of a Gantt chart showing all the different people that we affected and the people that we trained and the people that they trained. And he sent it to me, and I looked and I went, "Holy shit." I forgot. There are guys that I forget. Barry Horowitz. There are so many guys that came through that I forgot about that ended up being great hands, and they had good careers. Maybe they, did we train a Hulk Hogan? Did we train a Randy Savage? No, but we trained a lot of guys who ended up having careers, and just to have a career in the business, to be able to say that you're a real professional, that's not take nothing away from the indie guys. look, some of these guys are talented guys in their own right. But, if you tell me that you wrestle professionally and, you get out in a crowd of 60 people every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or every 2 months, you're not a professional wrestler. You dabble in professional wrestling. If you knew how many people I've had come up to me in my lifetime and say, yeah, my cousin used to wrestle. And I'm like, who's your cousin? Oh, he was a mass destroyer out in Loose. I'm like, okay, man. So he's one of 973 mass destroyers, and he's in Loose. They don't really have big venues in Loose, and I don't think the WWE runs in Loose, Florida. Yeah. And again, not to knock, look, if you get out there and you have a good time in the ring, and even if you get paid $25 and you're in front of 20 people, knock yourself out. But I'll stop there.
Now, earlier this decade, you were actually asked by All Japan to return to team with Osamu Nishimura in the 2010 Real World Tag League. How did that event all come about?
Osamu and I wrestled a little bit here in Florida for a few matches as things went through here in the state. And, he got to know me. I knew him. He knew Carl real well. So, when the time came, he just gave me a call and said, hey, you interested in getting back in the ring? And I said, I guess. We'll see. I was actually was having some neck problems at the time. So when I went over there, I was a little bit hesitant to do much. In fact, one of the guys wrapped a towel around me and threw me over the top ropes and almost hung me. And when he did that, my neck popped and I felt my whole body go numb from the neck down. I thought I was going to be a freaking paraplegic. And then I kind of said, man, maybe I'll never get in the ring again. Of course, I've climbed the ring a couple more times, but I'm very cautious when I get in now. I don't, I realize my place at a certain age and what I'm capable of doing, even though my head thinks different. There's another head that, there's an even deeper brain that says, no, you're not 20. So I went over there that time, kind of knowing that I was going to be limited. I thought I had some decent matches. I mean, it came off okay. I had some people say that they were surprised that I, still moved around okay.
Now, you're still very active in the scene in the Tampa area, especially fundraising community there for local causes. What are some of the things you've been involved with there the past few years?
I mean, my efforts have been to kind of help with the remembrance of championship wrestling from Florida from the old days. And when I say that, I mean the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. That's when I grew up. And and the community of wrestling was so important to the community of Tampa that, it's sort of been coming upon me to make sure that everybody remembers as best as I can help that happen. And part of it obviously is due to due to my dad being who he was and pretty important in Florida wrestling. I like to keep his memory alive, even if it's just for my own selfish needs. And then there was this venue here in Tampa, which is Fort Homer Hesley Armory. It's been revived and rejuvenated by the Jewish Community Center. Brian Glazer of the Bucks is now the namesake of Brian Glazer. Brian Glazer, JCC. And so, part of my efforts has been to make sure that people understand the importance of that building when it was the house that wrestling was in every Tuesday night here in Tampa. So I focused in on championship wrestling in Florida, the guys who were big in the day, and on this building that was arguably or inarguably the Madison Square Garden of the South, is what they used to call it.
Now, any upcoming events that you're a part of that you wish to tell us about?
No. No, there's no upcoming event. Well, as I say that, I am helping a documentary film producer who is working on a documentary, and it may actually be a docu-series based on how this ends up being sold. But he's been involved in interviewing a lot of guys. He's got about 50 interviews of all the different people who came through here and people who were associated and some fans. And there's a lot of archival footage of what went on here in Tampa and then also throughout the rest of Florida. So with all of that material, all of that content, we're kind of I'm pitching in a little bit to help her with bringing a documentary about with all that content and maybe helping her to sell it to out in LA.
Nice. Anything you want to say about an old friend of both of ours, the man with the best punch in the business, Bob Cook?
Yeah, Bob. Look, Bob was one of those guys that, there were a number of terms for guys like Bob. None of them good. No, I'm kidding. Bob was a journeyman. Bob was a carpenter. He was that glue that held matches together, even if the guy that he was going against was going to go over that night. He was just a solid hand. There were a lot of guys like that through the years that didn't receive the giant paycheck. I got Ric Flair's paycheck by mistake one time in Charlotte, North Carolina. Needless to say, he was making a hell of a lot more than I was making. But was he working any harder? No, he was just, he was who he was. He was flamboyant. He had something special at the time, and that something special, transported him to a new level and kept him there the rest of his life. Bob didn't have that, but Bob had just good, solid ring skills and good timing. And what makes somebody great for me is somebody who looks like they take your head off, and you have to double check and make sure that they just did something because they're so easy to deal with. It's not like today where even the slaps. I mean, even the guys who slap, the Ric Flairs and the Wally McDaniels and stuff. I didn't even buy that. I mean, to me, it's more. My dad could make it look like he was tearing you apart, and you had to double check and make sure he was still standing in the ring with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the journeyman. That's a guy. That's a guy who knows his shit. And then, of course, you throw into that somebody who has good timing, and now you got the great. You got a great mixture. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Bob wasn't that guy who had that X factor, that itch, that something that was going to propel him to the top. Obviously, he didn't. But what a good, solid hand. And he's one of the. I mean, look, the guy I just mentioned, who I always forget, Barry Horowitz, another guy. Just another good, solid journeyman. I mean, his claim to fame was, one of the longest losing streaks, I think, for a long, I forgot what it was back here in Florida.
Back when he was Jack Hart, yeah.
Yeah, that was probably the only thing that he was famous for. But man, he could get in the ring, work with anybody, good solid hand, everything he did looked legit. And at the end of the night, you all went home and you didn't have to go get stitched up or have surgery the next week.
Now, Joe, I can't thank you enough for your time today on the show. Any final words out there for the listeners who have been following your career the past few decades?
No. What's that time to look? If somebody received any enjoyment from watching me in the ring or anybody else that I ever dealt with, that's in and of itself enough. I've had plenty of that come my way. So again, my goal, if I have any goal when I do these things, is to kind of keep, maybe I keep a few people grounded. Maybe some people who are in the business, I say something where they go, oh yeah, maybe I'm not as hot as I thought I was, and I need to just be concerned about my work. And for guys who follow it, just to maybe let them know that we're people. I think the one thing that I attempt to do is add the personal side to a lot of this that people don't do in these interviews, and we really didn't even have a chance to do much of that. I mean, again, I try and talk more about my dad as opposed to talking about Boris Malenko. Guys like Bob Cook and their struggle with Mountain Dew, as opposed to talking about how good they are in the ring. Anyway, I'm rambling on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, sir.
Okay, appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Jeff Cobb, and you're listening to Japanese Wrestling Classics with Roy Lucier. Aloha.
There you have it, wrestling fans. There's my interview with Joe Malenko. And speaking as a fan, first of all, I must say that part of me is like screaming inside, like, I can't believe it. I just interviewed Joe Malenko, to be honest with you. There's that mark in me that's like, damn, seriously, that was like really, I just want to thank Joel Deaton and Bob Cook, who I had been talking to, who told me that, definitely Joe had no problem doing this. All I had to do was message him, and lo and behold, Joe, when I contacted him, agreed immediately to do it. In fact, he did it sooner than I even was planning on doing it. So thank you so much, Joe, if you're listening, for agreeing to do the show. I'd also like to thank Jeff Cobb for his introduction that he did earlier. He's got an amazing clothing line on Pro Wrestling Tees. In fact, he was just out there for the opening, the grand opening of that store in Chicago. He was out there with got a bunch of the guys. I saw the photos of it and stuff, and I saw him yesterday at the SPW show, and he's also sponsored by Suplex as well, their clothing line. So check both of them out at Pro Wrestling Tees and Suplex. Personally, by the way, if you're looking for amazing apparel to wear, check out Collar and Elbow and use the promo code Japanese Wrestling Classics. You will get a percentage off of your order if you use the promo code Japanese Wrestling Classics. Personally, the clothing, the shirts feel real silky smooth. I must admit they're great. They sent me a couple when they brought me on as a sponsor, as the sponsor of, as one of the sponsors on my show. Well, my only sponsor right now. Hopefully down the line I'll get some more. But their clothing feels great. I seriously can't thank them enough, and I can't recommend them enough to people. As far as local events in the area that I'd like people to know about, we have the SST Wrestling hosted by the Fatu family. This is a benefit fundraiser. This is November 3rd in Elk Grove. Look up SST Wrestling in Elk Grove on Facebook or on Google. We have, the whole Fatu family will be there on Sam Fatu's side, the Tonga kid. His boys, Jacob and Journey, will be teaming up in the main event. Check them out. It's a great fundraiser, and it's for local women's veterans and a local sober living home called the Joy House. So please, if you're in the area, definitely check it out. Tickets start at $10. We also have the Cow Palace coming up on a week after that on November 10th. Now, that show is going to be headlined by Rey Mysterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera against Penta Cero Miedo and Phoenix, with the semifinal being for the APW Championship. Jeff Cobb, who we heard earlier, defending the title against Jack Swagger. Battle Royal and so much more happening on that show. And then don't forget next year, if you're into Lucha Libre, they're going to be having an Expo Lucha at the Orleans Hotel. August 31st and September, August 31st and September 1st at the Orleans Hotel. Basically, it's going to be over 100 luchadors there, several exhibits like Rey Mysterio costume and mask collection, Christian Cement, the world's he's got the biggest mask collection in the world. This is something really everyone should be checking out if you're into lucha. If you're into Puro, guys like Ultimo Dragon will be there. So far, there's 21 names on the list. They got like Conan, La Parka, the original one, Blue Demon, Pirata Morgan, Willie Mack, Bestia Salvaje, Damien 666. I'm not Bestia Salvaje, Bestia 666. Sorry. And so much more. Check out their website at www.expolucha.com, and I hope to see all of you there. And the next episode will be a special treat. It's someone who recently made his first tour of Japan. But the guy is making a big name for himself in pro wrestling currently and is a aficionado and a student of the original style of All Japan from the 80s and 90s, who I'm very good friends with, who I'm going to bring on the show for an amazing interview. Anyways, everyone, thanks for listening, and I hope you'll be back next time for another amazing episode of Japanese Wrestling Classics with Roy Lucia.